Hello, we are joining gradually, so welcome to the event. We will start in a few minutes by the time we have more attendees. Thank you very much. So good evening, everybody. Good evening to the speakers and to the audience. Many thanks for attending this webinar dedicated to the latest development on investment fund law. So my name is William Simpson, and I'm in charge of the Conférence Saint Yves, which is the Catholic Law Society of Luxembourg, and it is an honor for me to open this online event. Let me thank the law firm BSP for co-organizing this event. The Conférence Saint Yves and BSP have worked recently on different subjects, notably a few months ago with Maître Trevisan on private litigation funding, and also with Maître Station on the role of lawyers in the development of the financial sector in Luxembourg. So it is really a big thanks to BSP for their welcoming and for their support and their trust. The webinar of tonight is divided, as you see, in three big presentations. The first one, so we will listen to Sebastiaan, and apologies for how I'm going to pronounce your family name. I'm trying. HOOGHIEMSTRA. So Sebastiaan is a fund lawyer. He works with the law firm Loyens. And he is also a lecturer on fund law at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. You may also follow Sebastiaan through his monthly articles in the newspaper HOOGHIEMSTRA. Sebastiaan will provide insightful comments on the Luxembourg Fund Toolbox and explain the recent changes inserted by the Luxembourg Parliament during the summer. Then we will have Dr. Mariia Domina Repiquet. Mariia is an assistant professor, maîtresse de conférence, in business law at the Lorraine University. She is the author of a textbook in French on alternative investment funds, published with Larcier in 2021, which I highly recommend. And she has written articles, one which was really interesting on partnerships and how various jurisdictions are competing to provide the most attractive partnership for investment fund vehicles. Mariia will discuss ELTIF, a hot topic as you know, and its UK equivalent, the LTAF. So no need here to highlight the importance of the upcoming ELTIF 2 regulation for the Lux fund industry. So we will listen carefully to what Maher has to say. And finally, we have two senior lawyers, fund lawyers, Evelyn Maher, partner at BSP, and Edouard, partner at Stibbe. And they will provide us with an open discussion on the AIFMD reform. They will pick up various chapters which are of our interest. And frankly, I really welcome this exchange. It really enables us to understand the most important changes which will be brought to the AIFMD too. So now it is a real pleasure to be able to listen to the new generation of fund lawyers and academics, and also to senior investment fund lawyers. Before giving the floor to Sebastiaan, who's next to me, I would like to thank our speakers and our hosts, especially the BSP staff, marketing and IT team. Thank you very much for all the good work. The webinar of today, so we have the time of the conference, and after we will produce an article in HOOGHIEMSTRA, which will provide the key topics we have been discussing today, and also a more detailed publication in the coming months, probably with digital. For those of you who need a certificate of attendance, we can provide one. You need to request it by email, so writing to BSP or to the Saint Yves. And finally, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the event. You just need to ask your question on the Q&A log, and we will pick up a few questions and provide, to the extent possible, some answers. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours, Sebastiaan.
Yeah, thank you very much, William, for the kind introduction. Yeah. All right. Yeah, 2.5 years ago, we organized also in a similar setting a conference on the Luxembourg Fund Toolbox. And of course, we have now an update from Luxembourg that was recently published in July and now really rapidly already adopted in fact. So we thought it was very interesting now to see where we actually stand, because there are many developments on the EU level. And yeah, therefore it's interesting to see where we stand and whether Luxembourg will also continue to be of importance in the alternative investment fund domain in the coming years. So I'll start up with some notes of the background of how Luxembourg became important in the alternative investment fund industry. Then I highlight the 4 most important changes of the Luxembourg Fund Law Toolbox. I will not address administrative improvements and the cleaning up that they did. I briefly say a few words about DLT because it's a bit an update that took place in the background. And then I conclude with some remarks about the current toolbox, but also the EU changes with respect to retailization and what is to be expected. Where do we come from? Luxembourg has not always been a very important player in the alternative investment fund domain. It is really a gradual development of the past 20 years. And if you really look at the statistics, then you see that especially in the last 7 years, it really exploded. And where we actually stand now is that if the statistics are correct, that 61% of all alternative investment funds newly established are being established in Luxembourg. So I believe that Luxembourg is doing something right. I mean, it has been in gradual development from first really the part of the product law, with first really a product-oriented approach with SICARs in 2004, then CIFs in 2007, which was really all around the product. And then also induced by European developments with the AIFMD, it was gradually shifted towards a managerial supervision and not so much a product approval. And Luxembourg was really flexible to also accommodate that shift by introducing rapidly the SCSP that allowed for strategies and flexibility already seen in Anglo-Saxon countries. And then also shortly thereafter, the RIFE law. So you see really that more and more there's a kind of neutrality on the product level and more a shift towards the supervision on the manager level. And you see that now also with like still the product laws that are being in place, that with this new modernization law, they try to really harmonize the existing discrepancies amongst the different topics. But we will not get into every detail of that, but we will address a couple of them now. And yeah, of course, they also did something in the DLT domain that is quite innovative compared to other countries in Europe. So yeah, there are really many topics in the toolbox domain that got updated. Like I addressed before, most of them were of administrative nature, so I picked only 4 of them. One which is really seen now in the light of retailization and the objective of the modernization of toolbox to really accommodate the LTAF and some other European developments. Yeah, you see that Luxembourg already in the past 2 years, I would say, positioned itself very favorably in the retailization debate by having an old vehicle that had very favorable characteristics actually for retailization, because it has, as a regulated fund, characteristics that are widely accepted under the national private placement regimes in various key distribution countries in Europe. And with view to LTIF, that will introduce a retail marketing passport. I have to say a real retail marketing passport, because before some kind of semi-professional investor passport, they have been trying to accommodate that and to make the vehicle more flexible, but not only the UCI Part 2, but also RIFE, CIFs and SICARs, and try to harmonize everything throughout the product laws. So one notable feature is that they introduced new legal forms, because originally the UCI Part 2 was coming from the era of UCITS, and they had only the SICAF SA, and they aligned with all the retail protection in place for alternatives, with what was already in place for UCITS. So now they introduce mainly partnership type of legal forms that are also to be found in the RAIF and in civ law, for example, like the SCSP that is very popular, the SCS and the SCA. I have to make a note though that I don't expect a lot of SCS or SCSP simply because Part 2 UCI is a retail product by nature. They usually use distributors to distribute such a product. There's not a lot of direct marketing by fund managers. And distributors find it very difficult to understand what is a partnership interest and pose many questions to us about that. So I think that mainly the SCA will be of importance. And you see in the Luxembourg market that to avoid giving investors control, that they have established in some instances master feeder structures with a feeder fund as an SA and an FCP as a master fund to prohibit investors from gaining control over the fund. So in that respect, I think it is a very important development to have an SCA. Also, for retail, it's not really great to individually negotiate with side letters, and therefore I think that SCS and SCSP are not really in practice accepted maybe by some host member states because they will probably not find it suitable for retail and may find ways to block it. So those are more my practical expectations for the vehicle. A second topic, which caused some discussion that maybe is not the most important topic of the four that I listed here, is the extension of the legal deadline of minimum regulatory capital. Throughout the product laws, they have doubled it, and in some instances there have been some criticism in Luxembourg that like doubling RAIF, CIF or SICAR from 12 months to 24 months to raise 1.25 million. If you're not successful after a year, then you should just close down the fund. That is basically what practitioners say. I have to say I do not really come across this a lot for not successful fundraising under this threshold, and that there comes compulsory liquidation, because what I see fund managers do, especially the big ones, is that if they want to keep the fund still alive, that they simply cross-fertilize. So then they use one affiliated fund or party to basically ensure that they have more time to raise capital. So I don't really see in practice so much issues with this. I'm a bit agnostic towards this development, I have to say. The third one, I think, is one of the more important topics, the minimum investment threshold. Many people say, okay, Luxembourg has decreased the threshold for investments in lives, and SIGMAR to 100,000 instead of 135,000, and also references that being made to the UVK that also have this requirement in there. So then they say like, okay, it's not so important development. I think it depends whether it's an important development or not. I mean, we see also in other competing jurisdictions like Ireland, the Netherlands, Italy, the 100,000 has always been a bit like the rule of thumb, whereas in Luxembourg it was a bit odd that it was 125,000, but I think most investors or management will really make a big deal out of it. But it could be important if AIFMD would contain an extension of the professional investment definition. I mean, this has been really a debate of the past 1.5 years. I have to say, I don't have the text on my desk, and all my friends that I asked for the text also do not have it. I do not see any of the major institutions publishing any comment on this, so I don't know if it contains it. I think it would be important if it would be in there. But then of course it's better that it is aligned with what is being decided upon on the European level. Two other important things that they did with this is that they clearly stated that they follow the professional client definition of MiFID, and the suitability has been harmonized, and especially because LTAF has a mandatory suitability test that can be important to clarify, because in the past distributors were saying, okay, LTAF has a different suitability test as the Luxembourg product laws and also as MiFID, so they have 3 different types of possible interpretations and problems to discuss with distributors, whereas now you might be restricted to only 2 or not any of that. I also have to say something about the retail investment strategy. the directive is proposing a new opt-up. I think it could be a game changer. Could be bad for LTIF also, because opting up might be in some instances easier than the retail marketing passport. But I will say something more about that in my concluding remarks of this short presentation. The last one is a subscription tax. We have seen that it has been amended. I don't think there is any manager nor investor who really makes a big deal out of this reduction. But it has been politically improved on the EU level to help the LTIF moving forward. And it was clearly written in a Capital Markets Union report that member states should do their best to promote the LTIF. So in alignment with taxonomy aligned sustainable investments, for which for UCIs already the subscription tax got reduced 2 years ago. They have decided not to impose any subscription tax for LTIFs. And I have to make the additional remark that this is not the Luxembourg phenomenon alone. Only you see it also in other member states that they have done this. So it is by no means to be seen as something very aggressive. Yeah, a topic that a lot is being said about is a DLT. Last year, Germany had adopted some specific laws about how you could put fund shares on blockchain or distributed ledger technology. The CSEF has introduced that through the back door, I would say, with just a Q&A in the UCI administration, in which it clarified that they are technologically neutral. I see personally in my practice an increased interest, especially for managers that want to use with digital platforms to market to semi-pros, and also potentially to establish a secondary market. So I do advise upon this now in practice. And I know that there are a lot of confusions about the topic that in my view is technically quite straightforward. Some managers have more a decentralized finance spirit in which they want to tokenize underlying shares or funds and freely distribute those. I see in practice that is not really workable, because fund managers need to have control over AML. They need to be asserted that eligible investors. So if you circulate tokens that are somewhat related to fund shares and then they are landing in the hands of an investor that the fund manager does not want to have, and then the investor is notifying to the manager that they are actually a holder of this token and need to be inscribed into the shareholder register, then there is an issue. But what Luxembourg says is that for registered shares, units, interests, you can put basically the partner register or shareholder register on the blockchain. It just works as a normal register like we always have. But in the past, we had it on paper, then you had it in a digital form, and now you have it on the blockchain. And basically for every single legal form that has registered shares, units, interests, this basically works. Also, Luxembourg has, for those funds that are listed, some specific laws that have been adopted in the past years, especially for ETFs that might be interesting. They have issuance accounts, securities accounts, and also the Financial Collateral Act is updated that really recognize also financial instruments that are issued in the DLT. And so it is all covered. If you want to pledge a partner interest and ascribe it and perfect it through the partner register, then that is all possible. And in some instances, I've seen it can be of benefit in investor management, in sharing information between the depository, the central admin, fund manager, but also in reporting and giving access to auditors. But of course, simply because if you want to transfer, for instance, a registered partnership interest to another shareholder, there's still a lot of manual processes involved. So it might not be for everyone, and also not for funds that have 15 or 20, 25 investors. I also don't really see why you want, as a fund manager, to educate yourself into all these complicated processes to allow for this. But for others, it works. And what I do recommend in my practice is, if a DLT is being used to abide by the CSEF guidelines and to record somewhere in the minutes that upon the establishment, some degree of due diligence has been done on the blockchain that had been used. But for quite a topic that is being made in practice very, very complicated. It is, at least in Luxembourg, very, very easy. You have to say in Switzerland or in Germany, there you would need to do very, very complicated things to make this work. But in Luxembourg, a quite pragmatic approach has been taken. So, yeah, what is to be expected? I mean, we a lot about retailization, and there's a lot of focus in the market on that because 3 times more money is in the high net worth individual domain than in the professional investor domain. Also, the growth of the next 5 years is 4 times bigger, at least it is like the prognosis now. So it's important that the has made these changes. It's always important to remain pragmatic and see what is needed. But yeah, it is rather an evolution than a revolution. I don't even know if we need to call it an evolution, but it makes some things a bit easier. It accommodates with LTAF that many people are very, very enthusiastic about. I was very enthusiastic about it until they suddenly came up with the Retail Investment Strategy Directive, in which they flexibilize the opt-out procedure. It is something under MiFID that not only the very big pension funds and insurance companies can be a professional investor under the AIFMD marketing passport. But yeah, in practice, we have seen very little opt-ups so far because simply even really rich, high net worth individuals were not qualifying under these conditions, which included 500,000 euro financial instruments, but also some experience in the financial industry and 10 transactions which are of significant size in a quarter, which is a bit a weird requirement. But yeah, it will MiFID with some conditions that are old and lapsed a bit. So now they have an education and training criteria added. They halved in their proposal now to have a financial instrument portfolio of 250,000. I think that the new requirements for legal persons in terms of turnover or balance sheet size are also reasonable. The only problem with this is that an opt-out procedure is by nature not really suitable for managers that want to do direct marketing. It is really a suitability test light. It's a lot of work. So either digitization tools can help with it or distributors. And therefore, it is really of importance that either AIFMD2 or AIFMD3 will introduce a requirement of 100,000 with self-certification, because otherwise for fund managers, they will be pushed into cost and engaging distributors that, in my view, are not really necessarily needed. But what is good about it is that, the 2 most popular vehicles potentially can become actually the winners, and then we don't have retailization, but it could become professionalization. Investors that were formerly retail could become professional, and therefore we can just use RAIF, SCSP, and don't need to use the Part 2 UCI. But yeah, of course, everything will need to be seen in practice, how everything will turn out in the next 2-3 years, and whether NPPR or the LTIF retail passport or this new opt-out procedure will prevail in attracting money. I also need to say, maybe as a concluding remark, that it's nice to have a nice toolbox, but it's easier to raise capital if you have one huge sovereign wealth fund that commits 1 billion rather than spending 1.5 years of your time structuring a fund, doing a listing, negotiating with 30 distributors agreements, aligning AML, and then only raising 400 billion. So it is not only the toolbox what will help, but I think also really practical and digital solutions will be needed to be attractive. But for sure, given that we are now on 61%, the new funds formed as alternatives in Luxembourg, I think definitely the toolbox will not hurt in continuing this trend. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Mariia.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Mariia Domina. I am assistant professor in business law at the University of Lorraine. And first of all, I'd like to say that I'm very honored to present some of my research among such distinguished speakers and famous professionals in Luxembourg fund law. So I will just share my screen. Just let me know if it works. Yes, so is it working?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, the topic of the presentations that I prepared for today is long-term investment fund structures in the European Union and in the United Kingdom. So my objective is to briefly present you LTIF and LTAF and also analyze the similarities and differences, and also propose my personal opinion as to the future development of the situation. So let's start with LTIF. LTIF stands for European Long-Term Investment Fund, and the objective is investment in long-term projects such as infrastructure and real estate, with an objective to support a smart, sustainable and inclusive growth, mainly in the European Union. LTIF were first introduced in 2015. And in 2021, there were only 57 LTIF registered in Luxembourg, with total of 2.4 billion euro on the assets under management. So as you can see, it was not a big success. And in 2023, there are only 52 LTIF registered in Luxembourg, so the number has decreased, and 20 LTIF registered in France and 0 LTIF registered in the United Kingdom. One of the first LTIF that was registered in France invested in educational facilities in Africa. So the objective of this French-based, French-registered LTIF was to provide access to learning resources to people in Africa who didn't have access to the internet. So there is an amended LTIF regulation, 15 March 2023, that brings some important reforms, notably flexibility. So initially, for the LTIF, there was a rule that they had to invest 70% of the assets in unlisted companies that needed long-term capital, such as transport, energy, and social infrastructure. According to the new regulation, is no longer 70%, but 55%. New regulation, amended regulation also extends a pool of eligible assets. So LTIF can invest in UCITS and European-based alternative investment fund, provided that these funds invest in eligible assets applicable to LTIF. New regulation also extends the definition of real assets. As example, assets that have an intrinsic value due to their substance and properties, such as educational and health facilities. Next, investment up to 20% in simple, transparent, and standardized securitizations if the underlying assets represent long-term risk position. So that is a brief overview of LTIF. Now let's look at LTAF. LTAF stands for Long-Term Asset Fund, which was introduced in the United Kingdom in 2021, with further amendments in 2023. And the reason for introducing LTAF was first is that initially investors used a closed-ended funds, and the idea of the government was to propose the opportunity to invest in an open-ended investment fund. So LTAF represents a new authorized open-ended fund structure with an objective to accommodate investments in long-term and in illiquid assets. So legal forms that can be used for this type of investment funds: open-ended investment company, authorized unit trust, or authorized contractual scheme. And what is interesting about LTAF is that immediately it allows redemptions with at least a 90-day notice period. As compared to LTIF, this structure is way more flexible, even though the new LTIF regulation also allows investors to redeem the investment units and in some situations, but I will come back later to this point. So according to the latest statistic, first LTAF was established in the United Kingdom in March 2023, and the third one was established in April 2023. And according to the lawyers and investment fund managers, there is a growing interest for this new investment fund structure. So now let's look briefly at the comparison between LTIF and LTAF, and I just choose the most striking points to do this comparison. So both structures focus on investment in long-term and illiquid assets in areas such as venture capital, private equity, private debt, real estate, and infrastructure. And so the companies or qualifying portfolio undertakings in which these funds invest can be based either for LTIF in the European Union or in the United Kingdom for LTAF, or in third countries, provided that these third countries are not recognized as high-risk third countries or third countries that are not cooperative for tax purposes. So these long-term assets are not typically traded on public markets, and LTIF has to be domiciled in the European Economic Area state and LTAF in the UK. Who can invest in these funds? So in LTIF, institutional investors and retail investors. In LTAF, professional investors, high net worth, and other retail investors. So actually the idea of the UK government while introducing this LTAF structure was to attract investment by the pension schemes and also allow retail investors to invest in this structure. Now, what about marketing? So LTIF can be marketed via marketing passport to both professional and retail investors in the European Economic Area, and LTAF can be marketed within the United Kingdom. It cannot be sold in the European states unless via private placement regime. Now, what about eligible assets? So I already briefly explained that LTIF has to invest at least 55% of its eligible of its assets in different portfolio undertakings, such as equity, quasi-equity, and debt instruments, and LTAF at least 50%. What about diversification requirements? So, to my opinion, LTIF has stringent risk diversification requirements as compared to LTAF, because it presides that the 20%, at least no more than 20% of the capital has to be in a single qualifying portfolio undertaking, no more than 20% of the capital in a single real asset, and no more than 10% on UCITS funds and in any individual issuer. In comparison, LTAF sets forth the 50% rule as a diversification requirement, and others should be subject to prudent spread of risk. Now, what about redemptions? So as I mentioned at the beginning, LTAF is an open-ended investment structure, which means that investors can redeem their capital contributions. In order to do this, they have to give at least 90 days notice. LTIF amended regulation allows redemption under certain circumstances, and the level 2 measures will set forth the rules that will apply to these situations. So now, having proposed you a brief overview on LTIF and LTAF, what are the perspectives for the future development in this area? First of all, we can say that both European Union and United Kingdom reforms are aimed at attracting investors and promoting long-term investments in socially important projects. Both LTIF and LTAF can become recognized labels. It would be interesting to follow the developments in the United Kingdom to see what will be the alternatives for UCEF and UVECA funds. So, as I mentioned earlier, the objective of LTIF is to promote smarter, more sustainable and inclusive growth in European markets, and LTAF is the same, but in a British market. However, if we look at the qualifying portfolio undertakings, they are not necessary. They don't have to be necessarily based either in the European Union or in the United Kingdom. They can also be based in the third country. So I think personally that the fund will invest in the recovery of Ukrainian economy once the war is finished. In Ukraine, there are many socially important projects, long-term projects, such as developing infrastructure. Unfortunately, because of Russian aggression, many buildings were destroyed, both office and residential buildings. And now there is a need to rebuild the buildings and also include bomb shelters. Why? Because when there is an air raid signal, people have less than 2 minutes to go to the bomb shelter, and that's why it's important that every residential building and every office building is equipped with a specific bomb shelter. Also, there are some projects that aim to build bomb shelters near bus stops and also in schools to allow the biggest number of people to actually save their lives. Another interesting and important social project is reforming Ukrainian infrastructure to allow for a growing number of disabled people. So in Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, in metro, there are no lifts, meaning that a person in a wheelchair cannot take a metro. And because the number of people that have lost their arms and legs because of due to the Russian aggression is constantly growing in Ukraine, there is a need to rethink and amend or build new infrastructure to account for the needs of these people. So I personally believe that there is a lot of space for LTIF and LTAF to invest in socially important projects in Ukraine. So I think the time is up, and I will thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can contact me on my email address, which is available here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mariia. And well, during your presentation and Sebastiaan's presentation, we heard about a lot of names and acronyms, and we will really focus on one of those, which is AIFMD. So as a good old senior lawyer in Luxembourg, then I will allow me to start with a little bit of history. AIFMD was a directive that was passed initially in 2011 after a quite long legislative process in Europe, which started back into 2008 after the financial crisis, considering that alternative investment fund managers, because they were taking a lot of risk, created some risk for the market as a whole. And then the European legislature decided to take some measures to regulate its environment that was completely non-regulated before, at least at European level, and create some kind of common level playing field for all alternative investment managers in Europe. Well, 10 years down the road, so a little bit later than initially expected, the legislature decided to revisit its legislative framework. Why? Well, because there are why later than expected? First, because the initial framework has turned to be quite successful, even though initially all the players were quite afraid that it would limit the traction of the European economy for investment managers. Well, it's turned to be a success. And second, because of Brexit, then they had to take some time to reconsider passporting of this type of funds throughout Europe. So at the end of 2021, the European Commission released the first draft of a text to revisit the AIFMD. And then a quite long negotiation and consultations process started. And the last stage of this process is that in July, there has been the text has been issued by the European Commission, reviewed by the Parliament, considered and commented by the European Council. And nowadays, where we stand is that in July, the various European institution decided to enter into some what is called a technical trialogue, where they have to find a compromise text. All we are going to say right now will be based on intelligence of what we know about the technical trialogue discussions, because so far the compromise text, which we know has been to a certain extent adopted, has not been released yet and is expected to be released within the next 10 days, 2 weeks, or mid-October at the latest. So everything we're going to discuss with Evelyn is going to be based on what we heard, what we've seen, what we discussed, what we heard at economic and political level on the outcomes of the current discussions. So that's basically where we are. So considering that the text will be acceptable by everyone and all the European institutions, it should theoretically be adopted at some point of time in Q1 2024 for an implementation by the European member state by 2026 at the latest. The need for this new legal framework and the need for some improvement and enhancement of AIFMD really came from the fact that there are some difficulties that have been identified in the course of the past 10 years when basically using AIFMD. So first, there are still some differences of interpretation between the national authorities regarding the way AIFMD is implemented and interpreted. Second, there has been some inefficiencies, like for that's a topic that will be tackled by AIFMD to fully, like for loan origination funds, because there are still some limitations, and sometimes loan origination funds are accepted in some jurisdictions, but they cannot act in others. So it created some difficulties and some discrepancies in terms of competition. And finally, there has been as well some gaps with the type of data the various national competent authorities received or were expecting to receive, creating different analysis and interpretations between them. So all these topics should now be hopefully settled with the new AIFMD2 legislative framework. And this framework covers basically 9 different topics, which we will address one by one. So the type of activities an AIFM is permitted to carry out. There are substance requirements, loan origination activities, rules on depositories, reporting to authorities, disclosure to investor, liquidity management, because liquidity is really a key topic under AIFMD, and delegation, in particular delegation of portfolio management. So that's all the topics we're going to address in a few seconds. So maybe we can start with the permitted activities.
Yes, thank you, Edouard. So under current rules, an AIFM is authorised to carry out not just investment management activities for the AIFs, but also to provide ancillary services. To increase the efficiency of AIFMs, there is going to be some changes on the list of activities they can carry out. Firstly, on the list of ancillary services. So ancillary services are those that an AIFM cannot carry out on their own. These are, as the word says, ancillary to services of management of the AIFs. But that list is to be increased to include both administration of benchmarks and credit servicing. 2 clarifications on those 2 points. The administration of benchmarks and credit servicing were made by the Council in what we think will be the final draft of the directive. One is that an AIFM can administer benchmarks, but not for those of any of the AIFs that it manages, which is a bit strange, but that's what's going in there. And for credit servicing, there's going to be a provision whereby the member states can prohibit AIF servicing credits granted to consumers. Then on the extension of the other services, and these are the services associated with management of AIFs, it's to be clarified, as Edouard mentioned a minute ago, that originating loans for AIFs is a service that can be carried out, which for Luxembourg AIFMs, we know they can do that, but for lots of other countries, it's not so clear. So this is a welcome clarification, I would say. And also managing securitization, SPVs. There's 2 other changes, which are a little bit less clear. The European Parliament proposed to add the investment management function in Annex 1, management of joint ventures and mandates in respect of immovable property. It seems to be fairly non-controversial, but I couldn't find any discussion on this at all. I think it will be in the final draft. And the last point is in relation to ancillary services. So the European Council is adding wording to say that AIFMs can provide the same services that they provide to AIFs, that they can provide those to third parties, provided that there's no increase in conflicts of interest or there's no unmanageable conflicts of interest. And I think that's a kind of something that's welcome in the market for AIFMs. They have clarity now on what they can actually do. And that's it for the permitted activities. The next point is substance. And there the changes are, what we're talking about here are the changes around the level of information that has to be provided to the authorities when an AIFM is applying for authorization, and also some of the operating conditions that it has to abide by. So there's going to be a clarification that basically clarification on the level of information that has to be provided to national competent authorities. So there's the AIFMD has increased, will increase the list of information that has to be provided. Judgment on the human technical abilities by the AIFM, particularly for monitoring and controlling the delegates. For Luxembourg AIFMs, I don't think this is particularly worrisome, because we've been subject to 18698 since 2018, and I think a lot of the provisions are similar. There's also clarification that the two persons who are responsible for business of the AIFM, that they have to be full employees or executive members of the AIFM. Again, this is anything that is new to Luxembourg AIFMs, but it harmonises it at a European level. So hopefully the provisions applicable to AIFMs in other countries now will be in line with what we have had for a few years. One point the European Parliament wanted to introduce was that for AIFMs marketing AIFs to retail investors, that they appoint at least one non-executive director to the governing body of the AIFM. There was some pushback on this, and in terms of final agreement, what's been agreed is that this will be included in a recital to the AIFMD, so that it's recommended you have one non-executive director, but it's not going to be in the binding sections of the directive. And I think that's it. Maybe just the next slide there. Yeah, that's about the recital. Next provision that we're going to talk about the delegation. So after initial, lots of initial worries about what was coming for delegation, what we're left with is that on the delegation rules, not a lot is changing in terms of the ability for an AIFM to delegate or sub-delegate. There are some clarifications, particularly around the liability of the AIFM. So when an AIFM delegates, it remains liable for the actions of the entity to whom it's delegating. And the new rules now will clarify that applies regardless of the regulations of the entity to whom they're delegating, or the geography of that entity. Also, the delegation rules are being extended to include not just the functions related to management of AIFs, but also all of the ancillary functions. One important change is that if, and I think this is a welcome change, that if there is a distributor appointed to market the shares of an AIF and acting on its own behalf, either pursuant to MiFID II or under the Insurance Distribution Directive, that even if there's an agreement between the AIFM and the distributor to do this distribution, that is outside the scope of delegation because the distributor is already regulated, so they don't need that extra layer of regulation. The initial requirement or the initial proposal that delegation arrangements be reported to ESMA, that has, I think, thankfully for the market, been that's not going ahead. There's going to be no reporting of delegation on an ongoing basis to ESMA, but there will be additional reporting in the Annex 4 reporting. So the AFMs will have to report the delegation arrangements to the NCAs, and the type of information they'll have to report in that reporting is the delegated assets under management and the percentage of portfolio, the organizational structure of delegation and subdelegation, and details about the persons and functions involved. Maybe one point on the fire legal funds. There's going to be additional requirements that basically third parties will have to apply high levels of they will really have to apply the rules on conflicts of interest and submit detailed explanations to the competent authorities of the steps taken to manage and prevent those conflicts of interest. It's not exactly anything new. They are already subject to the conflict of interest provisions, but now it's just expressly stated that in these situations they have to provide more detailed explanations. That's it for the delegation. I think, Edouard, on the loan origination.
And delegation was that was a great topic where you see how the functioning of the European institutions work, because there was an ESMA wanted to control delegation, yes. And then they were supported by France, and then Luxembourg and Ireland were against this delegation model, of course, because the delegates, they were outside, so this would basically be a big issue for the Lux market. And then we came back to this compromise where delegation is still authorized, but there are some conditions that have been inserted. So that's you really see how the various institutions work together, and the member state and at council level and so on, and
came up with the right solution.
Yeah, exactly. That's the importance of the trialogue technical discussions. Now we'll turn to your loan origination. So maybe a little bit of background. What is loan origination? Well, now we have a definition in the AIFMD 2. But there has always been discussions regarding the possibility for funds to grant loans. Why? Because in many European countries there was a strict banking monopoly, according to which only banks were allowed to grant loans or to extend loans to other persons. Then some countries like Luxembourg and so on took the view that it should not be limited to banks, but under certain conditions, investment fund could also grant loans to professional or even to the public. And the question was, what's the definition of the public? So that we have welcome clarification from time to time from the CSSF, but still there was that discussion. And then and that's also probably one of the success of LTIF in France, because as Mariia mentioned, a lot of LTIF were created in France. LTIF clearly authorized LTIF to originate loans. And that's why the first LTIFs were set up in France to extend loans, because in France there was a strict banking monopoly preventing investment funds to originate loans. So loan origination is the activity that consists in granting loans, and it is opposed to what we call loan acquisition and loan participation. Loan acquisition is the acquisition of existing loans that were originated by an entity on the secondary market. And loan participation is the activity of syndicating loan and participating to the syndicate. And it has never been questioned that investment fund could participate into existing loans or could acquire loans on the secondary market. But the question was really whether they were allowed to originate loans directly. So as there were still discrepancy on the market, then the clarification on that topic was really required, and that's where the institution started the discussions. So at the end of the day, I think all the three institutions agree that it's important that investment fund can originate loans. And the idea was initially to create some kind of European harmonized framework for loan origination funds. We are not there yet. So meaning that it's not because you comply with the rules or a fund will comply with the rules set in the directive that it will be authorized to originate loans in all European jurisdictions, but at least we have a common ground of acceptable condition now between the different European countries where regarding the loan origination activity, and that should be the basis for authorizing loans to funds to originate loans. It's quite important to, I mean, from political standpoint, it was quite important to allow investment funds to originate loans as well, because there is a huge demand from players in every sector to get access to easy financing, and the banks, because of their own regulation, they restricted the credits. So many companies need to find alternative ways to finance their activities, and in the current context where states have less means to finance the real economy, banks are limited the credit they can grant, then everyone agreed that investment fund should be authorized to originate loans. And that's where we came and that's how we came to this new legislative framework. So basically, there are a couple of rules now which investment fund has to comply with according to what we hear. So first of all, we have a definition of what loan origination is. A loan origination fund, or LOF, is a fund that, the strategy of which consists in originating loans, and that originates loans for a proportion of its portfolio, which represents at least 50% of its NAV. So it's the largest majority of its investment policy shall consist in originating loans. The activity of a loan origination has been defined as well. So it's really the idea of being involved in structuring loans. The idea was to tackle the situation that existed before, where some funds tried to find some kind of third-party fronting bank or other entity to structure and discuss loan, and then they would just acquire the loans. But still, the fund were still at the initiative of this activity. Now, the simple fact that the fund is involved in the structuring of the fund will qualify this fund as a loan origination fund. Originally, the idea of the European Commission was to limit the loan origination activity to closed-ended funds. Why? Because only if you get financing from the public to grant loans, that's a banking activity. And then there should be some other consideration for the funds. And that's why the idea was to say, okay, there should be a difference between loan originating funds and banks. And the main difference is that they shall not finance loan by deposit. That was the idea. And that's why the European Commission suggested that only closed-ended funds, so funds where investors cannot request for the redemption of their shares, so it's different from deposit, could then originate loans. At the end, the compromise seems to be that open-ended investment funds. So open-ended funds are funds that are open, that allow investors to request for the redemption of their shares, are also authorized to originate loans as well, but subject to specific conditions. So shareholder loans will not be, so loans granted by the fund will not be, by the investor in the fund will not be considered as leverage, because there will be limitation to leverage for loans in order to limit the systemic risks linked to loan origination fund. And that's in line with what the regulatory practice of the CSSF, that didn't want that the firm could borrow money to then extend loans on the other end. So the limit is 125% of leverage according to commitment method for open-ended funds, because open-ended funds, they have to manage liquidity. So the systemic risk is higher for open-ended funds, and it's 300% for closed-ended funds. There are also risk retention rules. So what is risk retention rules? Well, what the European Commission didn't want and the other European institution didn't want is that a fund could extend loan, and if they consider that after a certain period of time the credit risk is not that great for that particular fund, then they could simply get rid of that loan, creating a systemic risk for the European economy. So the idea at the end was to say that if a fund originates the loans, if it transfers the loan or syndicates the loans, it has to retain at least 5% of the notional value of this loan in its portfolio, so that it continues to be at risk. And the 5% has to be in case of syndication in the most junior and unsecured tranche of the loan, so that the fund is at risk. So if it transfers the loan, then it will not get rid of the entire risk. And also in terms of maturity, and that's something I have not seen in the final text, but we've heard, is that there will be a difference regarding the maturity of the loan. So if a loan has a maturity of less than 8 years, the fund that originated that loan will not be authorized to transfer the loan. If the loan has a maturity of more than 8 years, transfer of the loan will be authorized, but not before a period of 8 years. So that's it. There will be a few exemptions, but I'm waiting to see the outcome of the final draft to see what these exemptions are. So as we have seen, a lot of concern of regulation of loan origination funds is linked to the liquidity management of by the funds of their portfolio, the AIFM. Liquidity management means that open-ended funds have some tools in place to make sure that at no point of time the investors may request for the redemption of their shares in a level that is much higher than the available cash at a certain point of time. So it only applies to open-ended structures. And then there have been discussions regarding the definition of the list of liquidity management tools and how funds or AIFM should implement these liquidity management tools. So the idea is that there is a list of liquidity management tools. So these liquidity management tools are really the safety that can be implemented by a fund manager to stop redemption or liquidity issues. And typically in this liquidity management tool, we find the gates, the possibility to stop redemption requests, the notice period, which is the duration or the period during which an investor is authorized to request for the redemption of its share, and also the period for payment of the redemption request. Gates, there are liquidity periods. There are other mechanisms which are more technical, like swing pricing. We also have the suspension of the NAV as a liquidity management tools, and there is a list which will be in a new Annex 5 to AIFMD now. Originally, the European Commission wanted the AIFM to be obliged to use at least one liquidity management tool and to disclose it in their documentation, so investors are informed that their possibility to exit from the fund can be limited in some situations. That's not something which is really new in Luxembourg, because that's something we have in place, that we've been implementing for almost ever, and which we even developed in 2008 with the side pockets and so on during the financial crisis. We know the gates and so on, but that was not authorized in all European jurisdictions. So now this will be implemented in all open-ended funds, should be implemented in all open-ended funds across Europe. Then the European Parliament and the Council consider that one liquidity management tool was probably not sufficient, and they want the AIFM to implement at least 2 liquidity management tools and to have a procedure in place and disclose it to explain how they will implement these liquidity management tools. Also, they can the national competence authorities can request the AIFM to activate some management tool, but they can also stop the use of some liquidity management tool in case they want to protect the market for any reason. Like, for instance, side pocket is probably one of the most discussed liquidity management tool, how it can be used, whether the investor's protection is sufficiently insured, and so on. So there will be, for liquidity management tool, there will be reporting to the national competent authorities so that they can monitor the implementation of liquidity management tools, and they can use their possibility to suspend, authorize, or request for the implementation of liquidity management tools. And also there will be an obligation to disclose the use of liquidity management tools to investors, that investors know in the fund documentation that they can be blocked, that there are time delays and so on, which is again nothing new in Luxembourg because that's been part of our fund prospectuses forever, but not everywhere in Europe. Now, from a more institutional standpoint, the AIFMD2 also consider revisiting the framework applicable to depositories. And there, well, apparently, the idea there was to create some kind of level playing field across Europe where a fund could use a depository located anywhere in Europe. So that a Luxembourg fund may, for instance, appoint a Lithuanian depository to do the custody of financial instruments and the record keeping and verification of ownership of other assets, which are the two core duties of a depository. There has been a lot of discussions in this respect, and so far it seems that this idea has been given up. So there will be no harmonized framework or no depository passport across Europe. There will just be, and that's something we're monitoring. We want to see how it's going to work. There should be some extensions of the Malta rules. And the Malta rules being the rules according to which, if a country considers that there is not enough depository or competent depository in its jurisdiction, it may allow funds located in jurisdiction to rely on the services of funds located in other jurisdiction. Again, that's brand new, and we're expecting to see what is in the draft released by the Trilogue Commission when to see exactly how it's going to work.
The next point we wanted to talk about was disclosure to investors. Not as exciting as liquidity management and loan origination, but still we have to comply with it. So under current rules, all AIFMs have to make certain pre-contractual disclosure to investors in the funds. It's normally included in the offering documents. And thereafter, certain periodical disclosures. It's what we call the Article 23 disclosure, is the pre-contractual disclosure. There's to be some additions to that disclosure, namely in the pre-contractual disclosure, the AIFM will have to, as Edouard mentioned earlier, say that there is the possibility of using liquidity management tools and the conditions pursuant to which those liquidity management tools will be used. And the other new point in the pre-contractual disclosure is that there operating fees and charges of the AIF borne by the AIF in respect of the AIFM or its affiliates will have to be disclosed. This wording has changed in the different iterations of the directive. It's not 100% clear what exactly is meant by in respect of the AIFM or its affiliates, but hopefully we will get a little bit more clarity on that as time goes on. On the periodical disclosures, there's two new points there. On an annual basis, the AIFM will have to disclose for the AIF that manages all direct and indirect fees and charges that were directly or indirectly charged or allocated to the AIF or to any of its investments. And the second new periodical disclosure is that the AIFM will have to disclose any parent company, subsidiary or SPV established in relation to the AIF's investments by the AIFM, the staff of the AIFM, or the AIFM's direct or indirect affiliates. Again, this is brand new, and there will have to be some clarification about what exactly is required here. One good thing to note is that initially it was proposed that those periodical disclosures would be done on a quarterly basis. And I think, thankfully for the industry, that's been pushed back to an annual basis now. How exactly the disclosure is to happen, I think that's still to be discussed and decided. That's the disclosure to investors. And then, importantly, reporting to authorities. Edouard mentioned at the very start that's one of the reasons AIFMD2 was brought about, because there was a difference in the type of information and the reporting that was being done to the national competent authorities. So all AIFMs have to do what we call the Annex 4 reporting. And what's required to be included in that is set out in Article 24 of AIFMD. And currently the rules say that the reporting has to be on the principal markets, the principal instruments, the principal exposures. That's gone. The qualifier principal is gone, and so the reporting is going to have to be on all markets, instruments, exposures. That's the first point. There's also going to have to be, there will be new reporting requirements on delegation and subdelegation, and I mentioned those earlier when we were talking about delegation. So the information on the assets, the amount of assets under management, subject to delegation, the processes that are in place to monitor the delegation, the types of due diligences that are done on the entities that are carrying out the delegation. ESMA, the European Securities and Market Authority, is the mandate to produce regulatory technical standards and implementing technical standards in order to come up with new reporting templates. So that's something to look forward to. There will be new templates and new rules about submission. That's all to come in the future in the level 2 regulations. One good point is that when they're coming up with these, they have to avoid duplication. So if an AIFM is already reporting something because it's subject to MiFID II, that's not to be included in these reports. So that's a good thing. Yeah, just a point on the AIFMs will be required to annually report on all the direct and indirect fees and charges incurred by the AIF. That's what I mentioned earlier in the disclosure to investors. There was a discussion on amending AIFMD to include new provisions on undue costs and what constitutes an undue cost. But that, I understand that's been dropped because there's a separate stream of regulation and guidelines going on with ESMA on undue costs. So that's been dropped out of the AIFMD now.
Exactly, and there is so far, even in the ESMA paper, there is no the ESMA opinion. There is no clear definition of what undue cost is. I mean, they explain how you calculate cost, how you do that. There is a methodology, but there is absolutely no definition of what an undue cost is. So even at the ESMA level, there is no clarity on what and no common ground to determine what are normal costs and what are undue costs.
But that's to come, I think, after AIFMD2.
Yeah, that's probably why they filed that initiative to
Yes.
AIFMD3 you mentioned. Well, now we have another. Well, this last topic is probably the one where there has been a very little discussion because everyone agreed. The European Commission made a proposal. The European Parliament made some clarification, so not challenging really the position of the European Commission, and then the Council just agreed with the European Commission proposal. So the idea, there are two elements. So there are new AML requirements. So the idea is that there will be a blacklist of jurisdiction or list of high-risk jurisdiction defined by the European institution, and that will be the list of reference instead of using the FATF list. And everyone agrees with that, and it's in line with the current initiative of the anti-money laundering directive. So we have our own European anti-money laundering legal framework now. And then there was also the idea to fight against tax evasion or in the and make sure that if a fund makes an investment, first this investment, but also the SPV it uses and so on are not located in any blacklisted jurisdiction from a tax standpoint. I think all the institutions agreed with that. The only clarification that were brought by the main clarification that were brought by the European Parliament was more the timing for assessment, because if you do remember, in the alternative world, we are most of the time in closed-ended structures. So if one country comes from a white list to black list or gray list or whatever, this may trigger big issues in terms of portfolio construction and allocations, with the obligation to sell assets which are not liquid. So that's why the European Parliament really specified all the time that this assessment has to be made one for all when making investment or when applying for authorization. So there is a list of countries that will be disclosed by the AIFM for each fund when the AIFM applies for the management passport, and will stay there. And basically the council approved the approach. So before the question, maybe you've probably seen that there has been one point which we have not addressed because it's not in the directive anymore, and that's what you mentioned. For a quite long period of time, there has been the question whether, and that was one of the key hot topic until very recently in the reform of AIFMD2, that was the extension of the marketing passport to non-professional investors. Reducing the thresholds to be eligible to benefit from marketing passport. It's been carved out at this stage. We are under the impression that it has not been reintroduced in the current draft, which will be released by the Parliament. The idea is that there are other initiatives, in particular the one you mentioned, revisiting MiFID and the opt-up possibility. That will be more suitable to address the retail market rather than extending the professional investor concept, which was also some kind of topic of discussion between the various member states, which had different views on what should be a professional investor and what should be a semi-professional investor, to which the passport could be extended. So far, probably we'll continue with the current system with a passport to professional investors, each member state being allowed to extend the benefit of the passport to its own category of what they consider as being kind of professional investors. And for the retail investors or the less professional investors, the possibility to opt up when the RIS package and the MiFID II is revisited.
So thank you very much, Sebastiaan, Mariia, Evelyn, and Edouard. It was really interesting, a lot of clarity in complex subjects. So if you have questions, please send them on the log we have here on Q&A, and we will take a few and answer. And depending on the questions, if you feel happy to pick them up.
I think there's a question on my presentation for the Part 2 UCI, whether SICAVs are mostly, or whether there's a trend to establish I think LTAFs or Part 2 UCI with LTIF label with the SICAV as A form. Now with LTIF 1.0, Part 2 UCI has been quite popular. Also raised. have been popular, so it really depends. But I think part two UCI probably Luxembourg a bit more popular than the Wave. And what I have seen in my practice is that all of the part two UCI's fronting investors, so in the master feeder mostly, because it's mostly subscription based. They're a SICAV SA because there's no other legal form for a SICAV other than SA, at least until the update recently. And like I referred to in my presentation, some promoters, very big promoters, have chosen to have a master feeder with an FCP on the master level. Some other promoters have copied the others. And of course, there's always a thing with structuring funds. Okay, the tax implications, of course. There's some countries that rather have the FCP, but as a SICAV, I've seen the most for part two UCI so far. And like I pointed out in my presentation, I believe that both from a regulatory perspective, it's member states accepting what they would accept and not gold plate. I think that the SA would probably, for future fund setups, be replaced by an SCA, because still it would grant sufficient comfort to host member states not to gold plate, I believe. And still there's a lot of overlap with the SA protections, whereas at the other hand, the fund promoters being protected by by a GP that is not as easy to be picked out. Okay, second question is for LTAF. I think it is for your presentation, Mariia. I don't know if you see the question.
I don't see the questions at all. The chat is empty.
So, we can just call it out. If you open it there, we can.
Is it, I have to see, is it a practical question or is it?
You see it now?
No, that is my question. That's not the question of Mariia. I don't know if it's a practical question or.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, it's a practical question. Just see, Mariia, whether you want to answer it. I can help you if you want, but I leave it first up to you because you have been more.
Yeah, just let me check it. So this is the question about the trend to adopt the corporate company, right?
No, there's
It's the second question about LTAF.
there's another question about LTIFs.
Let me see.
It's a practical one.
Yeah, maybe I can help you a bit, Mariia, to make not the people too confused.
I
The
mean,
question
if
is
you
whether-
want to go ahead, you can take my place.
Yeah, the question is whether LTIFs are now, I believe, under LTIF 1 structured as closed end and available only to institutional investors, or whether they have to be open to retail because of LTIF. Yeah, I mean, there's not a hard law requirement to have a closed end or open end for whatever investor type, an LTIF 1.0 or LTIF 2.0. But given the type of investors, LTIFs are almost exclusively, apart from some use cases for insurance companies or loan origination, structured for retail. And they always are open-ended. That's what I see. It's very difficult to, based upon the eligible assets, how it is currently in place, but also in the future, to really invest into alternative assets. So what is now currently done a lot is master feeder not allowed, and also fund to funds not, but what we believe is that it will be mostly a subscription-based product. So you will commit the money directly, and then later on it will likely be allocated to target funds or a master fund. That's also what we see for part two UCIs a lot. I hear now some criticism about the mechanism that seems not to be so easy under LTIF 2.0 as anticipated to have a fund structure, because some in practice believe that the target fund also needs to be by substance an LTIF. It remains to be seen. Could be the reason why LTIF might not fly, but in any case, the LTIFs that have been now structured, at least that I was involved in, have all been open-ended, because simply retail investors want to be having the opportunity, if they divorce or lose their business, to step out. So it's mostly like quarterly or some instances even monthly. But yeah, I don't think there will be a lot of appetite for closed-end LTAFs because they're not really a good liquidity alternative. And investors are not in the retail space not really willing to commit any capital if they cannot somewhat get rid of their position. They have now a kind of secondary market mechanism that you can indicate your interest to step out. But yeah, in order to have that functioning with a closed-end structure, you need to have a lot of liquidity, which I find potentially a very good trend. And what I believe that could work is that if you have a very big digital player with like 10, 20, 30,000 investors on it, that you could have sufficient liquidity to have a closed-end structure. And yeah, that is why it's supported by the French numbers and statistics with this this new mechanism that is being introduced in indicating interest to your fund admin and AIFM that you want to step out, and then they see for you whether there's someone who can replace you. But it's maybe a bit too far-fetched to say more about this in this stage. I mean, maybe even if the fund will not work, the master key will not work, and then we end up with a LTAF. That is not what I do not exclude in this phase, to be honest.
Because there are also many practical issues to be tackled, like if you do fund of fund and you have the exercise of clawback provision by the underlying funds, how do you implement that towards the investors when they just go in and out and so on. So that's I mean that's a good tool, but I think that the fund manager, before it sets up an LTIF, has to really determine which type of capital it needs and whether it needs stable capital or whether it wants to have a more volatile capital. And then if stable capital is not really the key of the manager, then he can tap into retail investors' money. But that will probably, well, that's my guess, it will probably remain limited, and that's probably not the tool to address the retail market yet.
Okay, if we have another question, we're nicely reaching 8 o'clock, so we may close the session if we have no other questions. Okay, thank you very much to our speakers and to the audience, and have a very good evening. Good evening.
Thank you very much.